I own a lake now, not a garden pond or a drainage ditch, a real 12-acre lake sitting right in the middle of a 340 home subdivision. And the woman who once called the cops on me for quietly fishing there at sunrise now technically needs my written permission to let anyone else drop a line in it. That woman is Monica Harrington, former president of the Lakeside Crest HOA, and somehow, against every expectation I had for retirement, she ended up becoming my tenant in spirit, if not on paper. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 67, and for 40 years I worked as a civil engineer for Riverside County. The guy in the background drawing property lines, reviewing subdivision plats, making sure no one tried to cram 3 houses into land zone for one. The kind of job where you live inside deeds and drainage plans instead of beach houses and golf carts. In 2017, my wife, Grace Cole, was already 2 years into a cancer fight. We kept pretending she was winning. And when we found a modest house in Lakeside Crest with a back porch that looked out over a small lake, she stepped outside, watched the sunset hit the water, and said, "This feels like breathing again," so we bought it. She loved that lake. Even though it was basically a glorified retention pond, 12 acres of water circled by walking paths and vinyl fences, she'd sit outside every evening with a blanket and a cup of tea, watching the light fade over the ripples. And for a while it almost felt like the disease forgot we existed. But cancer doesn't negotiate. And in late 2020, Grace was gone, leaving behind a stack of medical bills, a box of scarves that still smelled like her perfume, and a silence in the house that pressed against my chest every time I woke up. I've never been good at sitting still with grief, so I did what I've always done when my hands start shaking for the wrong reasons. I turned to a small project, something simple and repetitive. I bought a cheap little kayak from a sporting goods store, strapped it to the roof of my truck, and every morning around 6 I dragged it down to the lake, eased into the mist, and caught and released bass while the neighborhood was still sleeping, talking to Grace in my head about lures and weather and the 100 little things we'd never finished together. That hour on the water became the only part of my day that didn't feel hollow. Lakeside Crest was what real estate brochures call covenant controlled, which is a nice phrase for there's an HOA and you'd better salute. And at the top of that little empire sat Monica Harrington, 52, real estate agent, HOA president since 2016, a woman who believed property values were the highest moral law. She'd fine you if your grass brushed past regulation height, send certified letters if your mailbox wasn't painted the approved shade of charcoal black, threaten hearings over a truck parked on the street overnight. Most people grumbled and paid because fighting an HOA feels like trying to sue the weather. For a few years, I stayed invisible, just the quiet widower with the fishing rod, until March 2023, when a thick certified letter landed in my mailbox demanding $80 a month in lake maintenance fees, retroactive to when we moved in, plus $500 to register my $80 kayak, the total bill for $1,700 due immediately, allegedly for aquatic management, liability insurance, and infrastructure upkeep for a lake that mostly needed the grass cut and the occasional bag of fish food. I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, the old engineer reflex kicking in, 340 homes times $80 times 12 months. That's over $326,000 a year for a pond. Meanwhile, the budget line the letter mentioned was vague as fog. But I'm not naturally confrontational, and part of me felt guilty for using the water so much, so I paid the bill. Under protest, I wrote on the check memo, then decided if I was paying that much, I was going to fish every single morning and squeeze every cent of peace out of those sunrises. That's when Monica decided to turn control into performance, because bullies like rules, but they love an audience. Late April, the sky barely pink. I was out in the middle of the lake in my kayak, line in the water, when I heard boots hitting the dock, turned around, and saw Monica storming down the planks with 2 sheriff's deputies behind her like she'd hired her own SWAT team. She pointed at me and declared I was trespassing, disturbing the peace, using an unapproved vessel on community property, ordered them to remove me. One of the deputies, Deputy Carla Ruiz, recognized my name from old county meetings, looked at me, looked at the HOA president, and very calmly explained that a homeowner fishing on the subdivision lake did not constitute a criminal emergency, that what Monica had was a civil disagreement, not an arrest warrant. They left, but Monica stayed, arms folded, eyes locked. like she was willing me to sink the kayak out of embarrassment. The next morning, a new certified letter was taped to my front door, thousands more in fines for unauthorized watercraft use. Quiet, hours violations that didn't exist anywhere in the bylaws. A threat to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay within 30 days. And, for good measure, a county code citation about my grass height, filed by an officer I'd never met, but conveniently tagged complaint by M. Harrington, HOA president. It was transparent retaliation, and something in me finally clicked from grief to anger to focus. Bullies like Monica count on you being tired, scared, or broke, counting on you to fold, but I'd spent 4 decades reading fine print for a living. So instead of writing another check, I did the one thing she never bothered to do in 7 years of running the board. I dug into who actually owned that lake. 3 days after that second round of fines, I met Noah Reyes at a diner off Route 19. He's the current county surveyor, but 15 years ago, he was a nervous junior tech I'd taught to read plat maps and distinguish between a recorded easement and sure, you can cross my yard. We ordered bad coffee and eggs, and I asked him one quietly loaded question. Who owns the lake at Lakeside Crest? He pulled up the county GIS app, zoomed in on the blue blob at the center of the subdivision, frowned, turned the screen toward me. That's odd. The parcel was labeled Tract 17B, reserved for future county use, stormwater retention, no owner of record, no deed transferring it to the HOA. Just an old note from 1988 saying the county would decide later whether to keep it or hand it over, and a memo from 1992 explaining that the developer went bankrupt, the infrastructure was never completed, the decision never happened, and the land simply fell into bureaucratic limbo. I walked out of that diner feeling like I'd just discovered a secret room in my own house, drove straight to the office of Amelia Grant, a real estate attorney I knew through her late father, who I'd once helped with a boundary dispute. I dropped the HOA bylaws, the lake, fee letter, and Noah's printouts on her desk. She read them, then looked up with that particular smile lawyers get when they smell blood and paperwork at the same time. They're charging you for access to property they don't appear to actually own, she said. If there's no deed and no easement, their entire lake fee is built on sand. She explained something called a quiet title action, the legal way to claim abandoned or ownerless property. I'd file a lawsuit naming every potential interested party. Riverside County, Lakeside Crest HOA, the defunct developer, publish public notice, wait 60 days, and if nobody objected, the court could declare me the owner of Tract 17B, not through trickery, just by following the procedure the law provides when everyone else forgets to pick up what they built. She warned me Monica and the HOA could fight back later, might sue, might smear my name, told me to document every fine, every letter, every code complaint like I was building a bridge of evidence I might need to cross someday. And I went home and started scanning papers like it was a second job, grief slowly shifting into something more precise, anger with a blueprint. In early May, I filed the quiet title action, paid the $450 fee, and went back to fishing at dawn, saying nothing to anyone. The county responded within 2 weeks with a polite, "We have no objection and no interest in owning this parcel." The HOA never responded at all, because Amelia had mailed their notice to the corporate address they'd registered back in the early 90s. An office building downtown that now sat empty, the letters waiting in a rusty mailbox while Monica taped new fines to my door. On day 61, Judge Harold Mercer signed the order, and I walked into the clerk's office to record a deed listing Ethan Cole as the legal owner of Tract 17B, appraised at around $340,000. I remember stepping back into the parking lot with a manila folder in my hand and a weird, numb feeling in my chest, like I just pulled off the strangest magic trick of my life. No smoke, no mirrors, just ink and patience. I didn't gloat, didn't build a fence, didn't post no trespassing signs. I went home, made a sandwich, and took my kayak out for a test float on my own lake. Just me and the sunrise and the ghost of Grace laughing at how absurd her husband's life had become. It took about 3 weeks for the HOA to catch up. A new certified letter arrived. More fines, threats of a lien, a list of every morning I'd been seen on the water. So I made a clean copy of the recorded deed, wrote a short, polite letter to the board. As of June 12th, I am the legal owner of the lake. Your authority over this parcel has ended. All fines related to it are void. Further harassment will be treated as trespass and send it certified. Return receipt requested, then sat back and waited for the explosion. Monica called an emergency board meeting, waved my letter around, accused me of forging documents, of stealing community property, convinced the board to hire an expensive law firm out of the city, and a week later I received an 8-page cease and desist from Kindle and Shaw LLP, accusing me of unjust enrichment and fraud and hinting at a lawsuit that could bleed my retirement dry. When I asked Amelia what it would cost to fight, she said, $50,000, maybe more, numbers that made my stomach clench. At the same time, a friendly code enforcement officer named Derek Miles suddenly discovered my lawn, mailbox, trash cans, and porch light, filing citation after citation, most of them dismissed once I pointed to the actual county code. But each one required time, a response, a hearing. It was death by paper cuts, and I could feel the strategy. Exhaust the old man until he surrendered. The neighbors started avoiding eye contact. I became that guy fighting the HOA, the troublemaker, the man who just wouldn't pay and shut up. And for a while I almost understood why people cave. But then one night, at 2 a.m, someone slid an unmarked envelope under my door, the kind of move that tells you you're not as alone as you feel. Inside were 3 years of HOA meeting minutes, including a closed session line quoting Monica saying, "We need to make an example of Mr. Cole so no one challenges board authority again," along with the vote approving $4,500 a month to Harrington Property Solutions LLC, her husband's company, for community consulting with no deliverables, no reports, nothing but a monthly check. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking from a different kind of adrenaline. I called Caleb Ortiz, who runs an investigative blog called Sunbelt Watchdog, a former reporter who now makes a living exposing small-town corruption, met him at a coffee shop, and handed him a folder containing the deeds, the memos, the budgets, the minutes, and my own quiet, title paperwork. He read for 20 minutes, then looked up with a grin that said this story was going to catch fire. His article dropped 2 days later. HOA president charges families for lake she never owned, funnels $100,000 plus to husband's LLC, complete with scanned documents and a breakdown showing Lakeside Crest charged nearly 7 times the average lake maintenance fee in our county. It hit local social media, then Reddit's HOA horror story page, then TikTok, where someone turned it into a 1-minute recap that racked up millions of views. By the time Channel 9 News pointed a camera at my front yard, the State Attorney General's office had already opened a consumer protection investigation into the HOA's finances. I stood on the shore of my lake and told the reporter the simple truth. I checked the records, discovered the HOA never owned the water they'd been charging for, used a legal quiet title process to claim abandoned county land, and now the board that called me a thief was being asked where all that lake money really went. The clip of me quietly asking, if they never owned it, who's actually been taking your money, started circulating, and suddenly Monica wasn't the one controlling the narrative anymore. The emergency membership meeting that followed looked nothing like the sleepy HOA gatherings I was used to. Instead of 15 board residents and a tray of stale cookies, more than 200 homeowners packed into the Lakeside Crest Community Hall, some holding printouts of Caleb's article, others just looking stunned that the tidy amenity fee on their statements had turned into a minor scandal. At a folding table up front sat Monica Harrington, flanked by 2 rattled board members, insisting she'd only ever acted to protect property values. But the agenda on the screen behind her said it all. Motion to remove Monica as president for cause, misappropriation of funds, retaliation against a homeowner, failure to disclose conflicts. The works. A neighbor named Paul Jennings read the list, and when the floor opened for a vote, hands shot up like a forest. They needed 2/3 to remove her. They got about 87%. Monica called it a witch hunt and stormed out to a ripple of claps and exhausted sighs. Lauren Mitchell, the board secretary who'd quietly slipped me documents, took over as interim president with 2 new appointees, Dr. Henry Blake and Chloe Adams, a retired doctor and a no-nonsense accountant. And then Lauren did something I wasn't expecting. She asked me to stand at the front of the room and said, on mic, "Ethan, on behalf of this board, We owe you an apology." She looked me in the eye and asked, "What do you want?" I'd had months to chew on that question at sunrise, and revenge had never fit right, because Grace wouldn't have wanted scorched earth. She would have wanted fairness and peace. So I laid out 3 conditions, my voice a little shaky, but steady enough. First, the HOA would immediately drop its lawsuit against me. Second, they'd refund every dollar I'd paid in lake fees. And third, I was willing to grant the HOA a formal easement so the neighborhood could keep using the lake on my terms. Those terms were simple. No homeowner would pay more than $15 a month for actual maintenance. No phantom consulting contracts. I'd hold veto power over any HOA rule affecting the lake. No surprise bans on kayaks or made-up quiet hours without my signature. The easement would last 10 years and could be revoked if the board abused it. The HOA would carry the insurance and handle mowing and basic care. And I would have the right to fish my own water every day from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. No fines, no threats, no drama. The board didn't even leave the table. Lauren said, "We'll take that." The membership voted. And just like that, the war over the water turned into something else entirely. 2 weeks later at the formal easement signing meeting, with Amelia beside me, Caleb tapping away on his laptop, and local news cameras in the back, a man from the state attorney general's office, Robert Hale, stood up and calmly announced that their investigation had found about $127,000 in HOA funds improperly diverted to Harrington Property Solutions, along with repeated failures by Monica to file legally required financial disclosures. Criminal charges were being referred to the state attorney, and the IRS had been notified. The room went as quiet as a church. In the back row, Monica stood, face pale and furious, insisted she'd only been defending the community from a thief, jabbed a finger in my direction, and something in me finally uncoiled. I stood up and walked a few steps toward her, not angry, just done. "You called the police on a widower catching bass at sunrise," I said. "You fined me thousands for an $80 kayak, tried to lien my house, buried me in bogus code complaints, spent hundreds of thousands of your neighbors' dollars trying to break me, all while charging them for a lake you never owned." I turned back to the crowd. "How many of you actually use this water?" A few dozen hands went up. "How many of you pay the fee?" Almost every hand rose. I laid out the math, $80 dropping to $15, hundreds a year back in each family's pocket, hundreds of thousands staying in the community instead of disappearing into overhead. Then I told them what I wanted to do with Tract 17B, not as a weapon, but as a legacy. We voted to rename the lake Grace's Haven, installed a bronze plaque by the dock, in memory of Grace Cole, who loved the water and believed in bringing people together, partnered with county parks to run free Saturday fishing clinics that I'd teach, teamed up with a local environmental nonprofit to replant the shoreline with native grasses and shrubs, and committed part of the saved fee money to build an ADA accessible fishing pier I had the joy of designing. By the time the first Grace's Haven Community Day rolled around in mid-September, the weather was perfect. 5 food trucks lined the path. A local band played under a rented canopy. Kids raced around with snow cones and painted faces. And at the new pier, I coached 40+ kids through their first casts, watching their faces light up as they felt a tug on the line. When a little girl named Sophie reeled in her first base and squealed, I felt something loosen in my chest I'd been carrying since the day Grace died. The neighborhood changed, too. HOA meetings started drawing 50 or 60 people. Lauren won the next election with over 90% of the vote. The board launched a transparency portal where every budget, contract, and minute was posted online. Closed session became the rare exception instead of the default, and 3 other HOAs in nearby communities reached out after seeing our story. 2 discovered they had similar ownership messes with their own lakes. 1 is already halfway through its own quiet title cleanup. In November, I sat in front of a state legislative committee as they debated the Lakeside Crest Transparency Act, a bill requiring HOAs to verify ownership of common areas and file clear financial reports with the state. And I had to smile at how far a simple fishing habit had carried me, from a kayak on a misty pond to a panel of lawmakers arguing about easements. As for Monica Harrington, word finally came that she'd taken a plea deal, 18 months probation, $127,000 in restitution to the HOA, 200 hours of community service, a multi year suspension of her real estate license, and a permanent ban on serving on any HOA board in the state. She and her husband sold their house at a loss and moved out of state. And when I heard it, I didn't feel victorious, just tired, and, strangely, grateful that her overreach forced all of us to fix what had been broken for decades. Now it's early December, the air cool enough to sting my cheeks, mist rising off Grace's haven in thin sheets. I sit on the dock with a rod in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other, sometimes alone, sometimes with a kid from the Saturday clinic who wants extra practice, the lake healthier than it's been in years, the neighborhood finally feeling like an actual community instead of a fiefdom, and I hear Grace's voice in my head, laughing. Don't get mad, get methodical. So I'll leave you with this. If you live under an HOA, have you ever actually checked who owns your common areas? Asked where your fees really go? And if you ever find a Monica running your board, would you keep your head down and pay? Or would you be willing, just once, to read the fine print and stand your ground?